We've been studying the European countries that remote work experts have said are the most tax-friendly for remote workers, and today I'm going to share them with you. Hi, I'm Andrew Henderson. This is Nomad Capitalist, where we help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally go where you're treated best. And one of the big phenomena that has exploded in the last 2 years is the remote work phenomenon. Of course, we've been following this intimately as long as Nomad Capitalist has been around, but the collective consciousness is now far more aware of the fact that many people can work from anywhere. We have some people in our company who work outside of our core areas, and we have had to pay special attention to exactly how that works. We also, for interest's sake, have a number of people in our core cities where I've said we are acquiring offices. We're now renovating offices in core city center locations as an investment. And in many cases, the people in those cities have asked, back when we had a very small team and people perhaps did work remotely within the country, hey, when are we going to have an office? So definitely this is not something that everyone wants to do. It's not something that is in everyone's consciousness. But I want to talk about groups like Work From Anywhere and others that we have been researching, and where they are saying are the most tax-friendly places for remote workers. Because again, as an employee, you do want to pay attention to this, especially if you're not an American. Are you a taxpayer in your home country? Should you be a taxpayer in your home country? This could be potentially an opportunity for some people to reduce their taxes, although depending on the company that you work for and how they're structured, it may also not be an opportunity to save. So there's a lot of variables when it comes to remote work. But in a vacuum, here are some of the countries that these groups that we have researched and talked to say are some of the most tax favorable. They don't always say why, and so I'm going to give you my feedback on this, and you can decide for yourself. This, of course, isn't tax advice. But among European countries that are the most tax-friendly for remote workers were mentioned Ireland, Portugal, Italy, Hungary, Serbia, Moldova, Turkey, and Georgia. Now, you've heard some of those countries mentioned here on our channel, some because, like Turkey, they have citizenship programs, others because they offer an interesting lifestyle, others because they offer low taxes or low cost of living, which may be interesting for remote workers. On Ireland, what was interesting to me is Ireland's standard generally is a day's test, and Ireland to me seems a little bit more flexible than some European countries in terms of just applying that day's test. How many days were you in the country? They have a 1-year day's test of the standard 6 months. They also have a 2-year day's test of 280 days. And so they can get you on the 6 months, they can get you on the 280 days. Now, I love Ireland, and I think that Ireland has a lot of great tax ideas over the years. I'm not entirely sure why Ireland's on the list, other than Ireland does have tax incentives for people who aren't domiciled there. Is a remote worker necessarily going to go through that? I can tell you it's a pretty expensive system to set up in many cases in terms of establishing and doing the proper tax planning for non-domicile. Ireland, not a cheap jurisdiction for tax work. Also not a place where you're just going to go and get a quick, swing through consultation and be done for a couple €100 in most cases. So I think Ireland's a fantastic place if you're a 7- or 8-figure entrepreneur. I think it could be a great place for remote workers, but I perhaps think that for a lot of people who aren't making huge salaries, it may be a little bit too much work. Love it, by the way, though, as a tax-friendly jurisdiction for people who run businesses. Portugal on the list. Now, Portugal's known for its NHR program. The issue is the NHR, as I've told you before, is the Swiss cheese of tax exemptions. And so again, can remote workers get some benefits? Depends on how you're structured, depends on how you're set up. It doesn't seem to me to be as tax-friendly, but certainly Portugal has some tax incentives. Not entirely seeing how they're applied to remote workers entirely. Italy also has tax incentives. The one that we talk about for, again, 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs would be just simply a lump sum tax. A more simple version of that of Switzerland next door. And so if you want to shell out 100,000, or if you're married and both of you are working, 125,000 euros, you can go to Italy and you can make all the money you want. Are most remote workers going to fall into that? No. Now, Italy has other incentives where you can get a multi-year tax exemption to reduce your taxes by anywhere from 70 to 90%. There are certain issues that come into play with that, though. For example, if you're not an American, Italian Social Security, their pension regime may come into play. So with all these European countries, it's not quite as simple as just going to a tax-free country or even going to a territorial tax country. These European Union countries do require some tax planning. And again, obviously, if you have an 80,000 euro a year job, you have one paycheck, it comes from a certain company, you can do the planning where the company is paying you, and you can do the planning where you're moving. It's not going to be, of course, nearly as complicated as if you're running a big business. but it still does require some effort. Hungary, certainly known for lower corporate taxes, for pushing back on raising taxes in Europe, certainly does have some incentives. Again, I don't know that all those apply to remote workers. Serbia, interesting place in that there's a relative flexibility. Again, depending on how you're structured, Serbia has less developed tax rules than a lot of European Union countries do. So depending on how you are set up as a remote worker, or if you're a freelancer, for example, there could be some tax incentives there. Overall, I mean, salaries, I can tell you as someone who has a company in Serbia, salary taxes, the income tax part may not be that high, although it does get somewhat high. The pension taxes get pretty crazy. And so Serbia could be good for certain people who are doing freelance work. Again, probably not as good depending on where you're coming from. If you have just an income from a company that's hard to control how it comes into your bank account. Moldova, interesting, a place we've spent a lot of time. Don't do a lot of tax work there, so we'd be interested to hear more about that. Turkey, the same, hardly a tax haven. And there aren't really that many exceptions in Turkey. So I struggle to see that one. Georgia's the one that we talked about before, and so Georgia has a couple of interesting systems. If you become a Georgian taxpayer, you can benefit in many cases. There's a list of people who can qualify for a 1% tax on up to $500,000 gel. So that's about 150,000 US dollars. So for a lot of remote workers, that'll be fine. And if you're making that amount of money in Georgia, you'll be the king of Georgia. So you'll be fine. Now, there are some restrictions on how that works. Georgia also has, if you're running a foreign company, they make that relatively straightforward in terms of being able to pay a very minimal amount of tax, perhaps none. And so again, whether you're just getting a salary coming in, you could be taxed very fairly. If you're running a freelance company, that could be taxed very fairly. And so there's so many caveats here. I mean, that's the list. Now, what do you not see there? You don't see France, you don't see Spain, you don't see a lot of the countries that we tell you to avoid. To their credit, listen, Italy has started to become more open to bringing people in and offering tax incentives. So certainly I think that like a Georgia makes sense. I can see the merits of some of the ones in the EU, although I think that I see a number of caveats and issues to be aware of. Again, it's hard to justify or to explain which of these countries are best because, again, one person who's a remote worker might be either a freelancer who has their own company. They get to control where that company is, and they can set up some kind of foreign structure or some kind of pass-through structure. Or perhaps they work for a company, and their company says, hey, we don't care if you set up a corporation, we'll pay your corporation. In that case, so long as you are not an American and you don't have to deal with the business or profession test, you can theoretically run a company, and you may have more advantages in some of these places to take advantage of the tax incentives. If you're just earning a salary, that sometimes can be more difficult. I mean, I've always said the best position to be in if you want to legally reduce your taxes of any nationality is to run an active business. The next best is to have some kind of passive income, whether it's crypto or you're trading futures or whatever the case may be. And after that, the last one, in many cases, really is you're a salaried employee because you may, again, have to deal with where are you being paid from, what are the pension tax consequences, what are all of that, especially if you're a U.S. taxpayer, that could be an issue. And then where are you going? So there's a lot of planning involved, and it's a lot to think about if you are earning $50,000 or $100,000 a year. Even if you're earning a couple $100,000 a year, it may be worth it. Certainly the lifestyle's worth it of working in some of these countries. It's a great places to live. Certainly you could also just move between these countries. Now, again, they're going to have various tests in these cases to determine if you are a taxpayer. It may not be a simple days test. And so I think people often underestimate, hey, I'll spend just under 6 months in Spain and just under 6 months in Germany. You're probably going to be in for a world of hurt, especially, depending on the country you're coming from. If you're coming from a Western country, and you're not paying tax to one of them, there's a whole series of issues here. But to just give you the list, those are the countries to at least begin your research. Those are the countries that have been mentioned by people who help people work from anywhere as countries to look into, so you can do your own research on those countries. And of course, you can learn more at nomadcapitalist.com. Don't stop now. We've got well over 1,000 more videos here on YouTube for you to watch and learn how to go where you're treated best. And if you want to work with Nomad Capitalist personally, go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply, learn about our unique, tried and true process, garnered over years of experience, and learn how you can become our client.